When we hear the term liminal space, we often think of the backrooms, abandoned malls, and horror games, among other things. The feelings it brings is unease or loneliness or even outright dread. For any who are unfamiliar with the term, liminal spaces can be both physical and metaphorical. Physically, I've seen a few definitions. A big empty room or hallway, or some man-made place that feels like an old memory. They're usually described as eerie or unsettling. In my opinion, places don't have to be indoors, dark, or even big to be liminal. It's that empty, isolated, removed from the world feeling that I'm looking for. And like metaphorical liminal spaces in life, sometimes you can very clearly see some light ahead, even if it feels like that light belongs to a completely separate place. There are definitely those classic horror movie liminal spaces that I don't find cozy. Those aren't the ones I want to talk about. And I also understand that those are the only spaces that some people will even call liminal. Yeah, I really feel like you can just go down a whole rabbit hole with this subject, so I'm going to move on. So here's some Yunchi background story time. I first stumbled upon the term several years ago. Some of you might have seen my vlogs, but I just graduated college and got a job teaching English in Japan. I had so many plans for my life, finally living independently like I thought a real adult should. I wanted to go to grad school and work in Japanese translation. A couple years back, however, I'd had a huge mental breakdown along with a lot of health issues. By graduation, I thought the worst was behind me, but I was super wrong. I won't go into the nitty-gritty, but basically, after unbearable mental and physical health problems, like chronic IBS issues and nightly panic attacks, among other things, I was forced to return home after 2 months and just sort of recover. So this is where the metaphorical liminal space feeling began. I would define it as transitional emptiness. Each day was the same as the one before it. Looking back on it, a lot was happening inside of me, but the outside was this uncertain in-between. Any attempt to leave this space would be met with brick walls, rejections, promises of employment from contacts and then disappearing off the face of the earth, one time from 3 people at once, and then quarantining during COVID on top of all that. It's like no matter what I did, things stood still. It was then that I came upon an article about liminal spaces, defining them as transition or waiting places. These places are never your destination, but you'll always need to spend time in them at points in your life. It's kind of like a Snorlax blocking your path until you've finished everything you need to get done. And I promise I'm not trying to be hip with the kids. I legitimately really like this metaphor. So anyway, society pressures us into constant external progress, constant movement. This liminal period of my life was frustrating and honestly shameful. I saw those brick walls impeding my progress as cage bars, and only later learned it was more like a healing cocoon. Many of us don't like the stillness and quiet of liminal spaces, but what if they're just as necessary as bright places filled with movement and action? Without that feeling of being stuck and standing still in life, without those predictable routines and empty, long stretches of time, I never would have been able to do all the brutal inner work to grow and heal. At some point, I took a strange liking to liminal spaces. I even looked to see if anyone had done a positive video essay on them like this, but all I found at the time were videos explaining the creepiness of them, with games like the Backrooms or the Stanley Parable. And I've never played the Backrooms, but the Stanley Parable is brilliant. Anyway, the closest I could find were fans of Edward Hopper paintings. I'm not particularly an art buff or anything, but there was something liberating about his art. Yes, there's that infamous isolation, the sense of emptiness, the feeling of being a small dot in an endless desert, but now it feels cozy? The world has become so loud, and we're always so focused on getting to one destination and then the next destination. To me, liminal spaces feel like you and the enclosed space you're standing in has been plucked out of all the noise, all the seconds, minutes, hours of our world, and just placed in some pocket dimension far away from everything. So in Legend of Zelda terms, it's like right after you defeat the temple boss where the music is really peaceful and everything is safe, and it could go on like that forever until you decide to leave that nice little bubble and exit the temple you likely won't step foot into ever again in that save file. Even when I was little, that part of the game always gave me a really cozy feeling. Or if we're continuing with Zelda metaphors, this one is more unsettling to most people, I guess, but it's like in Majora's Mask when you're hanging out for those last 5 minutes before the moon falls and you have to turn back time. But in those 5 minutes, the music is really nice, to me at least, and you can be anywhere in that world, and there's absolutely nothing else to do except turn back time. So there are those examples, but what about the more well-known liminal spaces? Where is the coziness in abandoned malls or old hotel swimming pools? I don't know why that's a thing, but it is. For some reason, it's so easy for me to get sucked into these images. Recently, I've been into the vaporwave liminal spaces too. Weirdly, they bring me the same sort of comfort that the Edward Hopper paintings bring me. In the end, I think I just want time to stop moving. More than that, I want time to stop existing, or for it to never have existed in the first place. I want a space that never changes, where retro sits next to cyberpunk. A place that exists eternally outside of time, untouched and uninhabited. I suppose I'm looking for a safe haven and an escape. I realize the reason we instinctively dislike these places are the same for both physical and metaphorical liminal spaces. Many of these places are dim and solitary. What's ahead of us isn't clear, and the solitude feels lonely. It's an unfamiliar place that feels like anything can jump out at us at any time. Yet, paradoxically, everything feels like it's in stasis, like it's frozen in time. Ultimately, I think veering away from these places is a good instinct. As humans, we need movement both physically and in life. But we also need to know that our world and our lives are ruled by cycles. For example, if you want to grow vegetables, there's a transition between planting the seeds and harvesting the crops. Like nature, humans have seasons too. Our lifespan is the more obvious example: birth, growth, decline, and death. However, it's less common to hear that it applies to the smaller things as well. People think apparent lack of movement in a period of life means something's wrong with them, but they don't see they're in a place where all the growing is still happening underground. Or maybe they've reached fall or winter. Decay and death rarely feel good, but these parts of the cycle are necessary to clear the way for rebirth. I and a lot of other people, however, find it hard to let go of things, to accept this necessary decay and death. I also don't think most of us are taught properly how to release things. Just like we give in to the instinct to avoid what appear to be empty transitional places, we also give in to the instinct to hold on tight to what we think is ours and never let go. But that is a topic for a whole different video.